Contributors include Morgan Stanley with their Thoughts on the Market podcast, which offers perspectives on current events and what they could mean for the markets. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, available where podcasts are found.
This is 94.9 KUOW Seattle. It's 12:07. Time for KUOW's Week in Review.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. This is where we get down together and figure out what happened this week and what it all means. And I'm so happy to have with me from the South Seattle Emerald, publisher Marcus Green. Marcus, good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
We've got Q13 reporter Jennifer Lee. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
I'm not hearing people yet. Is it just me? Or is it that Erica C. Barnett? I see you. I want to see
Bill,
if I can hear you.
me?
Welcome to the show. Erica is here from the CisForCrank.com. I'm not hearing you all, so that's going to be a little issue to do a radio show. So maybe we should take a break, and I'll check with my producer. We'll maybe run a little music. Bernard, give us a little time to work it out so I can hear my guest.
I think Bill has us muted. His mic is muted.
94.9 KUOW Seattle. We're experiencing a little technical difficulty with the program at the moment, but we're working on it and we'll get it squared away as soon as we
As I was saying, this is Bill Radke. I'm bringing you the Week in Review with my guests who are going to help you through what happened this week, as long as we can all hear each other. Such is the way with remote broadcasting. Let me see if I can hear South Seattle Emerald publisher Marcus Green.
Yes, Bill, I am here. Thank you for having me on the show this week.
I can't wait to see you, and I'm happy to hear you. Q13 reporter Jennifer Lee. Hi, thanks for coming.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for having me.
I heard that. And the publisher of the C is for Crank, reporter Erica C. Barnett. Erica, thanks for coming on again.
Hey, Bill. Happy to be here.
And I'm glad that we've worked out the issues, because I'm not going to see you all for a bit. I'm going to be gone all summer long. I figured, this is a summer where I can't travel and nothing is open. So it's just the perfect time to really take advantage and do nothing all summer. So we're going to bring a rotating group of KUOW hosts. Maybe we'll be with you all this summer. We're going to have, Ross Reynolds and Marcy Silman and Zeki Hamid and Jeannie Yandel, and I'm going to see you again in September. So thanks for being my last show for a little bit.
Well, it's the proper way to celebrate Juneteenth, Bill, is, some freedom there for you.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And by the way, you can watch our show if you like. We are streaming this at facebook.com. We're on YouTube at youtube.com. I'll just leave it on all summer in order to monitor my home for theft. So we can just. Okay, on with today's show. Let's see. Last week, we were telling listeners about the CHAZ, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone around the Police East Precinct building. Now they're calling it the CHOP, Capitol Hill Organized Protests. The police chief called it Capitol Hill Occupied Protest. The zone, the protest zone, has also come to resemble a street fair, which prompted one speaker there to remind the crowd why they're there in the first place.
This is not no party. This is not no party. They are still killing our people in the streets. They are still killing our people in the streets. Let me ask this. What happened on May 25th, 2020? Anybody? Thank you for that. It took you guys a while, but that's how fast we forget. And we out here celebrating like we have won something, that we have gained something. But I want to continue to emphasize we haven't won nothing.
So let's go around the group. Jennifer, you've been in the CHOP many times. What do you notice?
Yeah, every single time I visited there, it has changed, it has grown, it has shrunk. I have seen it when it feels like a party atmosphere where it just seems like people are either having some sort of dance party, playing dodgeball, playing basketball. But my most recent visit this past week was actually when all of the labor unions gathered together during the MLK labor vote. And it definitely had more of a serious tone as well as a more protest-like tone to the actual area. So it's been very interesting to just kind of float in and out of there and just see it take shape every single time, a different form.
Marcus, how much time have you spent in the CHOP?
I haven't spent a great deal myself. I have sent reporters out there, and some have stayed overnight to relay messages to me. I will have to say, I mean, I think this just kind of goes to show it's a demonstration that when you have change, when you have these various communal pop-up spaces, it can be messy sometimes. And in terms of it, in terms of centering a message at times, in terms of it, everybody sort of being organized around one narrative, it can be difficult. I was talking to my reporter, I reminded her that heck, you even had in the French Revolution, it took them 90 years to stabilize and actually decide on a on a platform for that country. So it's you're not going to have a quote unquote well-oiled machine in the span of 2 weeks when you have these sort of pop-up protests.
Erica, what's your take?
I also have not spent a ton of time there myself. But I agree with Marcus. I think it's really interesting that there is this debate about what is this about? Is this about homelessness? Because now there's, people are being invited to live there when they're not really welcome anywhere else in the city. Is it about this set of demands or that set of demands? There's a set of demands that are much more detailed and I would say a lot more radical than the original list of demands, which were defund the police and redirect that funding to community groups that provide community safety and also release all the protesters. It's gotten kind of, there's a lot of mess, and that's how these sort of leaderless protest movements work. And I have found it kind of, darkly funny that the city keeps running around trying to find who the leader is. Or at least that's what they keep saying when they're trying to get the East Precinct, quote unquote, back. And I think the fact is, and this is illustrated by the fact that it is messy and there are so many demands and there's all different kinds of groups and vibes, is that this is a leaderless protest. And that's, that's messy, but it's also exciting if you're somebody who is advocating for some of these changes.
You mentioned the police getting the precinct building back. Who wants to predict what's going to happen with the police, and are they going to somehow negotiate or force their way back into that building?
I think we've heard varied opinions about that. Some people have said that SPD will never have the East Precinct back. And I've even heard from, some of the older folks who have seen the activism play out through the years in Seattle say that East Precinct was built to help support the Black community and have quicker response times from officers, and they absolutely will return it to the police department. So I think it's hard to say. I also believe that, it sounds like the mayor as well as her police chief are split on how they'd like to see the East Precinct move forward.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Erica.
I think that, this kind of speaks to the uncertainty around this, speaks to the question around what is going to become of the police in the first place. So, when we conceived of police, or when we conceive of police as the only possible response to community, to communities feeling unsafe, then yes, it absolutely makes sense to say, well, look, we need to have this precinct there so that the police can respond to 911 calls. But people are actually asking, should the police respond to 911 calls? And one of the demands that's out there is, let's have a dedicated mental health force that is, force is the wrong word, but a dedicated group of mental health professionals responding to mental health calls. And let's have people who are actually specialized in the areas that people call 911 for, responding to them instead of armed police. So if you conceptualize public safety that way, then it becomes not really a question of, can we make police respond as quickly as possible, but should police be responding at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing else that I would add to that is that I think it should be noted, right, that there will be a mayoral election here in a little over a year, and so how our current mayor Jenny Durkin responds to this, there will be some calculus in terms of how she is potentially looked at by our city, and by those who will potentially be voting for her in the election come 2 Novembers from now.
On the 911 question, how would police know what they're potentially dealing with when they get a 911 call? Like, there was that car, the auto shop owner said he called 911 several times, that there was a break-in, that they didn't show up. How would police know if police isn't the go-to? How do they know whether to show up or who to send instead before they know what the situation is?
Well, why would police necessarily? I mean, what I'm proposing, or what I'm saying is an idea that's out there, is that 911 calls don't just be routed through police. That sometimes maybe police are the correct responders, but let's start a step back and figure out who should be going to a mental health crisis, who should be going to, because a lot of these situations where we see Black men and women being killed by police begin as things that either should never have been escalated to the point of police even being there, or that could have been dealt with through somebody who didn't have access to a gun, for example, and who was trained in a different way and was not trained to respond with violence to something like shoplifting. So I would say that the argument would be more that we step back a step from call the police to call 911 or whatever you want to call it, and then see, who really needs to be responding.
Right. Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
No, you go ahead, Marcus.
No, I was just going to say, just to follow up on Erica's point, and that's something she's educated me on in her reporting. 9 out of 10 calls to police are for nonviolent encounters. And so you do see in other areas, whether it's Dallas or some other cities, who are, attempting to pioneer actually sending, mental health professionals and social workers to those type of calls as opposed to police. And, again, just to underscore what Erica was saying, this is essentially asking, what is the best way to deal with these situations? Is it a police force, no matter how progressive, or is it actually taking, this out of the purview of the police force and putting it into the hands of people who could maybe better respond to these issues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to add to both Erica and Marcus's points, I remember just this past fall, I went and I met with Seattle Fire Department's Health One unit, which started out as a pilot program. And essentially, firefighters were being sent out to these calls that weren't for fires, and obviously taking up their time. And we want to make them available on the chance an emergency happens. But anyways, this Health One team became available, just for a purpose like that, where they would go meet a person, see if they could offer social services. Maybe they just needed someone to talk to, help them through a problem or situation. So I think we've seen, even from, that smaller scale program work out to some benefit to people who live in the city.
Well, we'll see what happens to the CHOP. As I said, part protest, part seminar, part street festival, part community garden. It's all there. I want to, and we'll talk more about police reform in a moment as we continue. But I want to end it on I guess a funny note. Did you guys see that Fox News reported a Monty Python sketch as news about the chop zone? There's a movie, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. King Arthur arrives in this village and tells the supposedly ignorant, uneducated peasants that he's their king, and they're not buying it.
Didn't know we had a king. I thought we were an autonomous collective.
We're an anarcho-syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week.
Yes.
But all the decisions of that officer have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting.
Yes, I see.
By a simple majority in the case of purely internal affairs.
Be quiet.
So somebody went on Reddit and jokingly compared the Capitol Hill occupied zone to the Monty Python peasant communists, and Fox News ran with it.
And we're also learning that there is infighting among some of the occupiers and some signs of rebellion against Raz Simone, who we introduced you to here on the story last night. One posting on social media that has now been deleted read this: "I didn't vote for Raz. I thought we were an autonomous collective, an anarcho-syndicalist commune at the least. We should take turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week." It's just part of that.
Fox News breaking the medieval story there. So finally, do you have any prediction for how long? It's not like it's wet and dark and cold. It's the crest of summer. There's serious work to be done. There's fun to be had on Capitol Hill. Any predictions for what Capitol Hill looks like for this summer?
I think it could. I'm just going to jump in with my uneducated guess because I don't like silence and say I think it could go all summer. I think the timing of everything has been so interesting and just, has fallen into place that like this started happening right as the weather got nice and people were maybe not as likely to be at work because of COVID. And it's just, it's just been such a perfect storm of circumstances that is allowing people to be living outdoors or spending their time there during the day. So I think it could go all summer, depending on what Chief Best does. I mean, she is obviously very unhappy with this situation and has expressed a lot more displeasure with it than the mayor. Because I think in a way it benefits the mayor politically to say, this is fine, we're going to let it stand. That doesn't necessarily mean making any lasting changes, to just allow it to be there.
All right, I'm not going to force the others to make a prediction. We'll come back and we'll talk more about what's likely to actually happen on the militarized police front, on the reform front, when we come back on the Week in Review.
Hey, it's Patricia Murphy, host of Seattle Now. Question for you. What day is it? Actually, what month is it?
This morning, I realized that every calendar in my house is still set to April.
If the days have all started to blend together, why not give them some sort of distinction with a daily news podcast? So at least you'll know when it's the weekend, and we'll keep you on top of what's happening in our community. Just search for Seattle Now in any podcast app or find us at kuow.org/Seattle Now.
Support for KUOW comes from Bill and Paula Clapp, who salute the 160 members of Global Washington who are addressing the COVID crisis in the developing world. Learn more about how to help at globalwa.org.
This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. Sound stories, sound voices. It is 75 degrees in Seattle. We should reach 80 today. It's going to become increasingly cloudy, bringing us showers over the weekend. It's 12:26, and we return to KUOW's Week in Review.
This is Bill Radke. Here is what you will not be hearing in Seattle this summer.
State police are trying to open the barricade. They're putting the pepper spray in the air. I only got one eye. These are flashbangs. It's a flashbangs. It's the tear gas. It's the tear gas. Police, stop!
That was citizen journalist Omari Salisbury with Converge Media. Seattle has agreed to extend a court-ordered ban on police use of tear gas, pepper spray, sound cannons, foam bullets, through the end of September. Meanwhile, the city council voted to ban police from using these weapons as well as chokeholds. But the police union says, wait, you have to bargain those rules. Who wants to tell us what that objection means?
Well, my understanding of the way that works is that the law can still go into effect, which it is very much needs to if this, because there's a court ruling right now that puts a moratorium, and I believe that expires either this week or next, I'm not sure. But if
we agreed to extend that.
Yeah, so if the city council does want to ban these weapons, I mean, this law does need to go into effect. And then it becomes a bargaining process. And what the union is saying is essentially that this is a working conditions issue. So they are unsafe without the use of things, or without the ability to possess and use things like pepper spray, like tear gas, like rubber bullets, like flash grenades. And I mean, it'll be an issue for bargaining. I don't think they have a lot of momentum behind them right now, considering this was a 9-0 vote. And a lot of people were out there getting pepper sprayed in the face and finding out what that's like. And so we'll see.
Meanwhile, the police chief, Carmen Best, told KUOW's Angela King that police should have tear gas.
But obviously, if the city council takes it away, we're back to batons and devices like that.
And do you really think those are going to be better methods to use on crowds?
I absolutely do not, which is why I support having some sort of modulated response. It can't be all or nothing here. We need to figure out a way that we can both respond, take care of public safety, and not overuse it, but also have the ability to have it on our tool belt.
So Jennifer, do you think tear gas is going to disappear in Seattle or not?
Well, we went to a press conference immediately after this decision with Chief Best, and she said that, she and the police department will comply with whatever decision comes out of council. But she did add that research has shown that using mechanisms like tear gas, and this is what Chief Best said, is safer for both the officers and for the people who they're using it on, the crowds. And going back to that point, it seems as if that she wants to go back and draw from research, not only across the country, but around the world, where they've seen large demonstrations from places even as far as Paris and London, to see what other methods they can use. Because by taking away pepper spray, tear gas, pepper bullets, things like that, I think she believes there needs to be a replacement to protect her officers as well as the public. Marcus,
what's your take?
Well, I mean, it's also important to note that this is also a public health crisis as well. I mean, there's we obviously listened to what Chief Best had to say. It's also important to remember that tear gas is actually banned, during warfare in the Geneva codes and Geneva conventions in terms of international law, and yet it's deployed domestically, and it's being deployed at a point when we have a respiratory pandemic. So, I think it's just extremely important to continue to note, that if we're attempting to put public safety and public health as paramount, then we should, listen exactly to our public on how they wish to be policed, and especially around, these days and times.
I think that statement that Chief Best made, that the city would be, the police would be back to batons if they can't use tear gas. I think that is exactly the kind of statement that leads people to say, let's abolish the police completely, because the binary that she's setting up, which is that essentially, we can either tear gas massive numbers of people because the police, who are armed in military gear and riot shields and gas masks, can't deal with someone throwing a water bottle at them, and can only respond to that individual by gassing hundreds or thousands of people in an entire neighborhood night after night after night. This is why people are angry right now. I mean, it's not the entire reason. It's not the precipitating factor. Obviously, that's, decades and decades and hundreds of years of violence against Black and brown citizens. But the fact is, when your response, because to people saying, please stop gassing our neighborhood, is, well, we'll go back to batons, which means beating people. I think that, I heard that and I got angry, just as a citizen of Seattle, because that is a scary thought, that if I wanted to protest, and I have been pepper sprayed in the face by a police officer, and I did file an OPA complaint, and it was not taken seriously. And so these individual, accretions of experience that happen to people, I think breed a correct skepticism that that the police really need to use weapons against citizens just because they've always done so.
Right. They're certainly not winning the PR war to just to back up Erica there. And then I think even just the usage of tear gas has been shown that it builds up an antagonism between everyday citizens and police. So I think if what we're looking for is a sort of peaceful resolution to this, it's certainly not tear gas or an escalation of violence with potential baton usage, as Carmen Best was saying.
Well, on the subject of abolishing the police, a big demand of protesters is that Seattle at least defund the police department. And this week, Mayor Durkan told me she's now open to that.
But we're going to look at the budget. We'll look at what a 20%, a 30%, and a 50% cut looks like. We're going to make sure that I can understand, the council can understand, the public understands. And at the same time, we also have to invest. So I've said we will cut the budget, but more importantly, we're going to reinvent how we do policing in Seattle.
So Erica, how much do you think Seattle Police will give up from its budget, and where will that money go? Any predictions there?
Well, this is, I want to just back up and say that is an extraordinary thing to hear a mayor of the city of Seattle saying, considering, I've been covering the city and city budgets for many years now, and every year the police budget gets bigger, not smaller. And even in the Great Recession, it was held pretty much harmless. So that is an extraordinary change. And I just want to acknowledge that, as a news item, that's amazing.
I think we'll look at the budget.
What's that?
She just said we'll look at the budget.
For sure. But just saying we'll look at what a 30%, a 50% cut is. That is something, those are, yes, I don't want to give the mayor credit for cutting the budget because that hasn't happened yet. But I do think that's an extraordinary statement compared to previous, just the situation previously. I do think there will be cuts. I think the city council is pretty reared up about this. And so I think that they're going to propose cuts to whatever the mayor proposes, unless she somehow comes out with a radical budget, which is not something that mayors typically do. And I think we'll see a lot more investment in social services. I think one thing we may see is the depolicing of the navigation team, which is the homelessness response team, which is now made up mostly of police and has grown every single year under Durkan's term to include more police. I think that's going to change. And I think we might start to see, maybe I'm just kind of getting riled up by all the protests that are going on and the fact that 60,000 people passed in front of my door last week. But it really does feel like something is shifting, and we will see significant investments in social services and in human services. Meanwhile, in the middle of a giant budget hole. So I think everything's going to be up for grabs, but I think those social and human services are going to be a lot harder to cut, and they're probably going to increase this year.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I think I've also heard the mayor say on camera that she will not be cutting the budget by 50%, that they will be looking to make cuts, but they will not be cutting the police budget by 50%. I agree with Erica. I think that we will see some changes in the budget that we haven't seen before. And I think that just speaks to the fact that, our leaders, whether we agree with them, like them or not, are listening and are making efforts to try and make changes, at least where the money's at.
What power does the Police Officers Guild have here? They said and I think the city attorney agreed that these change in working conditions around chokeholds and weapons, that's got to be bargained. What about cuts in their pay, and how much power do they have to deny that?
Well, I don't know that I don't know that anyone is proposing to explicitly cut police officer pay. I can see overtime, the use of overtime.
I meant budget. I was getting ahead of myself, because then there is part of this question, like, so if the budget's cut, where's that coming out of? And there's been a lot of police overtime. But yeah, I guess what I should say first is just the budget in general. Does the police guild have much of a say?
Well, I mean, they can certainly show up and express disapproval, but I mean, I'm pretty sure, and I'm not a labor expert, so anybody who is, please jump in. But I'm pretty sure that the city is able to cut the budget, particularly in a budget recession, as long as it doesn't involve specific bargaining conditions, which would be things like pay. But I could be misstating the exact details. But I do think when you look at the police budget, something like 75% of it, maybe a little more, is salaries and benefits. It's just paying for people. And
Right.
so, I mean, cutting the police is going to mean cutting police. And there's just no way around that.
I can't see them cutting police officer salaries, especially, if you're just starting out as a police officer and you're making whatever it was negotiated. I can't see that being cut. But I also think it's a really heavy topic to talk about in terms of overtime, because on one hand, we absolutely need to protect the public and have public safety in place. But then it also comes down to overtime and how expensive that gets when officers are working, especially in recent weeks, 17-hour days.
By the way, speaking of the union, the police union this week got kicked out of the King County Labor Council. The County Labor Council, a coalition, decided to expel them. Marcus, why did the Labor Council do that?
Yeah, they essentially said that it was because of the continued inaction of the guild to address racism, and to affirm, that racism is a structural problem in both society and law enforcement, and a willingness to address racism within SPOG, and a willingness to essentially state that they are actually taking actions, not just sort of PR steps, to make sure that they can sort of weed out racism amongst their ranks. SPOG sort of shot back with that they are attempting to do community outreach and so forth. And unfortunately, they've reached this impasse where 2/3 of the MLK Labor Council decided to expel them and vote them out on Thursday.
Yeah, I thought the Officers Guild said, oh, yes, racism is a problem, and whether it's PR or not, they said we're going to work on it, and the Labor Council still voted them out.
Well, I mean, it's this has sort of been a long-running issue, and obviously that isn't just that maybe it's been spotlighted right now, but I mean, the guild has sort of been a enemy of reform by, at least that's the take of many reform advocates for quite some time. I mean, there's a reason that we had a consent decree in this city that we are quite frankly still under, and so it just appears to too many people that this is an issue that continues to go unaddressed by SPOG, and it's more of a, hey, fool me once, shame on me. Shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And this is the thing of, hey, until you change, we are not allowing you to come back. And so we want the proof to be in the pudding. And when you come back and you have sort of worked on these issues in a way that is at least broadcasting systemic change and not just pretty words, then we can reconsider your rejoining us.
So who can explain that there's already this tension about that police unions, they're not really like grocery store workers unions, their role is so different. It was controversial when the Labor Council welcomed the Police Officers Guild in 2014, and the King County Labor Council was really backing the police a couple of years ago when they negotiated this contract that so many reform advocates didn't like, and now they're kicking them out. Any explanation? What's your analysis here, Jennifer or Erica?
Well, I think, go ahead, Jennifer.
I was just going to say, yeah, Bill, I mean, you're right. And I think that collectively, the King County Labor Council obviously holds a lot of power. They hold a lot of members. They have 100,000 delegates. And I think they recognize the fact that, having SPOG as part of the union, they would be supporting the police department as more of a symbolic group rather than just the individual officer. And kind of pointing back to what Marcus said, I also understood it that way, that, you know, an executive member of the Labor Council was saying that, you know, if SPOG wants to make a return, you know, that's something that we would consider, but prove yourself. Let's see some action.
And I think the resolution that that SPOG adopted, I mean, it kind of speaks to a tension within the Labor Council. Obviously, it wasn't a unanimous vote, and it speaks to a tension, you know, about whether it's enough to just sort of say, as you know, make a symbolic statement, because the resolution that the Labor Council adopted prior to this vote, you know, was viewed by some in the Labor Council as kind of toothless. I mean, it was essentially, do you acknowledge racism? And SPOG's statement was, yes, we acknowledge that institutional racism exists in all institutions in society, including police. And that is not the same thing as saying we are going to actually do something within the Seattle Police Department specifically, or even acknowledging it. So I think that it was a little bit of a cursed proposal in the first place. And then, you know, the fact that they were let in 6 years ago was symbolic. And the fact that they were kicked out now is symbolic of the fact that times have changed.
And is all this finally, is all this just symbolism, or is that ejection from the Labor Council going to change the police guild's contract and, you know, police conduct and police accountability, police discipline? Any opinions? I'm asking for a lot of predictions this week, I realize.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, other than it just being embarrassing, I don't think it in of itself is going to change anything. I mean, I was joking with a friend when it happened, and I said, this just goes to show you that the most powerful labor unions in the United States are either controlled by the police or professional athletes. You know, it's with, you know, we see things going on with the NBA right now. So no, I mean, I don't think there will be any systemic change that comes from this.
I mean, there wasn't systemic change 6 years ago when they were admitted, and there was a contract that was adopted that a lot of reform advocates really objected to in 2018. That is, of course, now going to be redebated and you know, that whole process is going to happen again in, I think it's this year. And you can tell I'm not a cop reporter, but I just, I think that it's, you know, there was a lot of argument at the meeting the other night that on behalf of SPOG that ejecting them would, quote unquote, isolate them. And I think they're isolated anyway, because I think cop unions are always isolated in groups of unions that include, as you said, you know, nurses, grocery workers. I mean, these are folks that have guns, they have more power than the rest of us, and they make six-figure salaries. And I mean, yes, there is like a pilots union too. So I don't want to say that you can't be an advocate for working people, you know, making a lot of money necessarily, but I do think, you know, they've always been isolated, and they've always been kind of the odd people out in these union discussions.
Well, you say you're not a cop reporter, Erica, but you did write about how there's a tangential police involvement in a program to move people into some of the many empty hotel rooms we have around the city. Could you just recap that?
Yeah, so there's a program called LEAD, which I'm sure a lot of listeners are familiar with, which is a sort of an anti-recidivism program between the Public Defender Association, which is a nonprofit, and the police. And that has been going on pretty successfully for a while now. It expanded to be this new thing during COVID called Co-LEAD. Co is partly for COVID. And the idea is they would move people who are experiencing homelessness or who are getting out of jail and are really likely to go back to committing crimes of survival into hotel rooms that they reserve for this purpose. And this program has been put in place in Burien and with, as I said, people leaving the King County Jail. But Seattle, there have been about 20 hotel rooms that are paid for and sitting vacant for various reasons. Seattle has been unwilling or unable to participate in this program since April. And LEAD tried to get people at the Ballard Commons moved into these hotel rooms. The city did the sweep anyway. They tried to do the same thing in the international districts with 2 removals that the city did, and that was unsuccessful. And now it's the reason that they can't do it is ostensibly because the police are too busy dealing with protests. And additionally, the people that they've gotten referrals into this program, the referrals are all from like months ago. It's people who were involved with a totally different issue around quote unquote prolific offenders across town. And so there's a pandemic going on. They have no idea where these people are. And so it's just like obstacle after obstacle put in the way of this program. And meanwhile, this nonprofit is spending money on these hotel rooms that are just sitting there.
That's Erica C. Barnett from the C is for Crank. We've got Q13's Jennifer Lee, South Seattle Emerald's Marcus Green. And speaking of the pandemic, King County inches its way further into the reopening plan. Restaurants at half-mast, and we'll have more when we come up on the Week in Review. Stay tuned.
The Daily is a news show that tells a story from the beginning, and it does it with sound and nuance, and it utilizes the extraordinary news operation of the New York Times. Almost 1,500 reporters who break the biggest stories in the world, and we do it 5 days a week. I'm Michael Barbaro, and this is The Daily. This afternoon at 2 on KUOW 94.9 and KUOW.org.
Support for KUOW comes from Fred Meyer, now offering online ordering at fredmeyer.com or on the app. Customers can choose store pickup or home delivery. Fred Meyer, fresh for everyone.
This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. Sound stories, sound voices. 75 degrees in Seattle. The forecast says we'll reach 80 today. It's going to start clouding up and looks like showers over the weekend. 12:48, and we return to KUOW's Week in Review.
This is Bill Radke, and I'm here with South Seattle Emerald publisher Marcus Green, Q13 reporter Jennifer Lee, the C is for Cranks, Erica C. Barnett, and we are streaming this thing. We're on Facebook and YouTube. You can watch people in little squares and join us that way too. You've probably heard that COVID-19 cases have been rising again in the United States, including parts of Washington state. But this morning, King County got permission to reopen a little more. The state said King County is now in phase 2 of the governor's reopening plan, which means stores can let people in at 30% of occupancy, restaurants at 50% capacity. Deputy Executive Rachel Smith says, okay, you've got some extra freedom. Now you've got to be extra responsible.
All of the activity that we have been so diligent about doing in terms of social distancing and mask wearing and being safe around others, we have to double down on that now. The more activity that is happening, the more cautious we need to be.
Jennifer, were you surprised that King County is heading into phase 2? Is there any debate about whether this is a good idea, or it's just so much of America is reopening that it's just inevitable?
You know, I think that going into phase 2, it just seemed like the logical choice. I think that it was kind of confusing to be in a modified phase 1, like a phase 1.5 of sorts. I know that it definitely helped a lot of the business owners, retailers, restaurant owners to be able to open, even if at that limited capacity. But I know that this is welcome news, and hopefully people will continue to adhere to social distancing, wearing face masks, washing their hands rigorously, and also getting tested if they develop symptoms. And that's actually a story that my photographer, Marcus Matheson, and I just did yesterday. We stopped by the Soto station and we got a COVID-19 test done. And I can tell you that it does not feel good.
No.
It doesn't hurt, but it's uncomfortable, very uncomfortable.
I really don't want to do that. I don't want to put the swab into my brain as it's been described.
Well, it's very interesting because they tell you as they're inserting the swab in your nose at the point in which it touches the back of your throat. So kind of picture that. But I do think that it is the responsible thing to do if, you think you've been by people who could have been exposed to the virus. And, that's what's being recommended. If you feel symptoms, if you think you've been exposed, testing sites are available and, they're free.
Yeah, the mayor said if you went to a protest, you should get a test.
Yeah, and actually yesterday we interviewed a young lady who said that she's been at all of the demonstrations from Capitol Hill, downtown to Central District, and she felt it was the responsible thing to do, especially for, some of the other people that she'll surround herself with.
Any other takes on phase 2 and COVID?
It's been really interesting to see, people sort of coming back out into the world, but I am like so used to living in this little box here that I personally have like tremendous anxiety about going out to a restaurant. And I wonder, how much phase 2 is actually going to mean people going out, or people are also feeling like me and not really wanting to expose themselves. I do think one thing about protests that's been kind of interesting, preliminarily, it has seemed like people are not really getting sick a lot from these protests, probably because they're outside. But another weird thing that has happened just statistically is transit has not been a huge vector so far for COVID, which really surprised me. But I think I have not been on a bus that has, well, that's not true. I mean, at rush hour now, buses are starting to fill up again, but for the most part, they're pretty empty. And I think people are still avoiding transit, and they're still avoiding like going into these crowded places. So maybe that'll start changing in phase 2, but just personally, I don't feel comfortable sitting down at a restaurant and hanging out for a couple hours.
How about you, Marcus?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly echo Erica's sentiment. I know this isn't a popular opinion. I just think it was just a little tad too early for us to reopen. I'm one of those people who believe that until there's some universal testing and a vaccine, that we need to be as cautious as we possibly can.
And in masks. That's another thing. If you're, the
yes, and in
health
masks.
person is saying that we'll open stuff up, but that doesn't mean the pandemic is over. So you still also have to deal with how you feel about being masked up, and whether that's a restaurant experience you want to have, or a salon, or a store, or a barbershop, or whatever it is. It's going to be
okay. The second my salon opens, I am there. Like, despite everything I just said, I've been calling them like once a week for the last 3 weeks. They have not called me back. Vane, if you are listening, call me, please. Look at this situation.
Yes, and I am a bit hypocritical. I did get a haircut yesterday. So
I will say it's been nice turning the TV on and starting to see people just look a little fresher, a little cleaner as we progress forward.
Well, the mayor did extend some closures in Seattle. Seattle libraries, community centers, playgrounds are going to stay closed through at least the end of June. She extended the ban on all permitted events in the city except farmers markets, although the mayor will be at the Next Steps rally in Judkins Park at 1 o'clock. There's the Freedom March in the Central District today, the 155th anniversary of Juneteenth, commemorating the end of slavery in the United States. By the way, Washington State recognizes Juneteenth with a day of remembrance, but it's not a legal holiday. State offices are open. State Representative John Lovick of Snohomish County would like to change that. His great-great-grandfather was born enslaved, and he told Lovick something that stuck with him.
Just crushes my heart right now was when he told us that his mom and dad were born slaves and never saw freedom in their entire life.
Lovick wanted Juneteenth to be an official Washington State holiday, as it is in Texas, Virginia, New York, and Pennsylvania.
It would mean that history matters.
But opponents said it would cost $3 million a year.
They told me not to use the term budget dust, but a few years ago, we would have referred to that as budget dust. $3 million in a $54 billion budget.
This year, a bunch of corporations are now making Juneteenth a paid holiday: Twitter, Nike, Target, but not Microsoft or Amazon. They're encouraging employees to cancel meetings, and Jeff Bezos suggested workers participate in a range of online learning opportunities that the company will provide. Marcus, you have said that this year Juneteenth feels different to you. How is that?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that they're obviously with our days and times, we're seeing more people who are just engrossed in sort of embodying, the need for change and the want for change, and who are actually grappling, quite frankly, with the truth about this country and the truth that many people have known about its sort of racist origins and its continued, mechanisms of racism. I think what's so great about these days and times is, I mean, you've seen Truth and Reconciliation Acts in places like South Africa, Rwanda, who have had obviously their own issues in terms of its, citizenry not, being given, full rights in their own tragedies. With us here in America, I don't think we've ever truly had a national, atonement or a national truth and reconciliation. And so what you're seeing now on Juneteenth and previous days, leading up to it, has been, individual, at least certainly grappling with the truth that has moved into the collective a little bit more. I mean, you see even on the New York Times bestseller list, it looks like a anti-racism reading guide nowadays with, Ijeoma Oluwa's book, I think is at the top, with Ibram X. Kendi's anti-racism book, not far behind. And I think just palpably, going to these, various protests, you do see people who are finally starting, I think, to wise up to the fact that there is a need for a better world. And then you're starting to see people who had been fighting for that better world, a more equitable world, start to have faith now in their fellow humans that this is possible. I mean, I know I certainly did. I'll tell you what, I mean, it was just 6 or 7 months ago, I want to say, when I first came back to the Emerald, and Erica and I happened to be sitting at a restaurant, and hope she doesn't mind me telling the story. She was the hero.
Not at all.
But, it was accosted by a woman who had some, racially charged conversation. Erica, who is less diplomatic than me, and justifiably so, told the woman what she could go do with herself and her and her mentality. But I mean, even back then, I was, it was just that recently that I was just like, oh gosh, this is nothing's going to change. Nothing is there's going to be no groundswell, of activity. And you fast forward, and now there are people who are marching in that same area who aren't demanding change and demanding, quite frankly, that it begins internally with them.
That's a great place to end the show. We're right at the end of our hour. Marcus Green, South Seattle Emerald publisher, Q13 reporter Jennifer Lee. The C is for Cranks, Erica C. Barnett. I'm really glad you're my final show before I'm heading off for a little bit. And I'll see everybody in September. And thank you so much for coming on this week, all of you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, guys.
Sarah Leibovitz produces the show, and we get streaming help from Teo Popescu and Juan Pablo Chiquita.